He was a cinematic force who could crush stereotypes with the flick of a wrist and captivate millions without saying a word. A philosopher in a fighter's body, Bruce Lee was unlike anyone Hollywood had ever seen. His lightning-fast kicks were mesmerizing, his screen presence magnetic, and his mind a reservoir of ancient wisdom and modern rebellion. But for all the world's admiration, his life ended in silence, alone in a stranger's apartment, just as the peak of his stardom began. Years later, tragedy repeated itself with eerie familiarity when his son Brandon died young, on the verge of his own breakthrough. And now, the last surviving member of this extraordinary family has broken decades of silence. What Shannon Lee reveals isn't what fans expected, because the truth about Bruce Lee, it turns out, is far more complex than the myth, what Shannon wants the world to know. For decades, Bruce Lee has stood as a larger-than-life figure, an icon of physical perfection, speed, and power. His high-flying kicks, intense stares, and martial mastery made him a permanent fixture in popular culture. From dorm room posters to global tournaments named in his honor, Bruce Lee's image became almost mythical. But according to his daughter, Shannon Lee, the world only ever saw part of the man. Behind the warrior persona was a deeply introspective thinker, a vulnerable soul, and a father who valued compassion more than conquest. Shannon Lee was only 4 years old when her father died, yet the emotional imprint he left on her has lasted a lifetime. As she grew up, Shannon began to notice how the world misrepresented Bruce Lee. He was rarely spoken of as a philosopher or a poet or a teacher of human potential. Instead, he was flattened into a symbol, tough, dominant, always ready to fight. "I didn't lose a superstar," she has said in interviews. "I lost my dad." In recent years, Shannon has become increasingly vocal in her mission to reclaim her father's humanity from the jaws of myth. Now the CEO of the Bruce Lee Family Company and president of the Bruce Lee Foundation, she has spent over 2 decades organizing archives, producing documentaries, and writing books that peel back the public image and reveal the deeply human Bruce behind it. One of the most painful flashpoints came in 2019 with Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. In a scene that sparked widespread backlash, Bruce Lee, played by Mike Moe, is portrayed as an arrogant, boastful figure who is effortlessly thrown into a car by stuntman Cliff Booth, played by Brad Pitt. Shannon was horrified. Not only was it a false depiction of her father's personality, she argued, but it was a damaging stereotype of Asian masculinity. The portrayal of Bruce Lee in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was so inaccurate, it was like being punched in the gut, she later told The Wrap. She followed it up with a powerful essay in The Hollywood Reporter, writing, "If they had just called the character Master Chang and had him do all the same things, I would have just laughed. But they used my father's name and likeness, and that crossed a line." Shannon's defense of her father isn't rooted in blind loyalty, it's built on intimate knowledge of his life's work. Bruce Lee wasn't a man obsessed with appearing unbeatable. He constantly questioned his own beliefs. He journaled obsessively. He read Jiddu Krishnamurti, Alan Watts, and Carl Jung. He was fascinated by the idea of self-actualization, the lifelong pursuit of becoming your best and most authentic self. As he once wrote, "All knowledge ultimately means self-knowledge." This was the Bruce Lee that Shannon knew, someone who encouraged those around him to evolve emotionally and spiritually, not just physically. He welcomed students from all backgrounds and proudly trained people of color at a time when racial barriers in martial arts were strictly enforced. One of his first students in Seattle was Jesse Glover, a black man who went on to become Bruce's closest confidant and assistant instructor. His willingness to teach non-Chinese students drew criticism from traditional martial artists back in Hong Kong. But Bruce believed in breaking down walls, not reinforcing them. Even as his fame exploded, Bruce Lee remained a hands-on father. Shannon remembers how he would take her and Brandon on playful adventures, and how he made sure to return to them after long days on set. He wasn't interested in being this untouchable god, she recalled. He wanted to be present. He wanted to be a good man. Perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of Bruce Lee, according to Shannon, is the notion that he was the embodiment of toxic masculinity. In fact, he spent his life actively rejecting it. He hated needless competition and preferred collaboration. He wasn't afraid to cry, to express doubt, to admit pain. These qualities didn't make him weaker, they made him stronger. But in an industry obsessed with surface-level strength, those parts of him were often edited out. Today, Shannon Lee continues to amplify the parts of her father that the world too often forgets. Through her book, Be Water, My Friend, through the TV show Warrior, and through heartfelt interviews, she's inviting audiences to understand Bruce Lee not as a statue, but as a human being. She's not just preserving a legacy, she's rewriting it. And in doing so, she's reminding us that the truest strength lies not in how hard you can hit, but in how deeply you can connect. The Man Before the Myth. Born on November 27, 1940, in San Francisco, Bruce Lee, originally named Lee Jun Fan, entered the world during a unique twist of fate. His parents, Lee Hoi Chuen and Grace Ho, were traveling for an opera tour when he was born. Shortly after, the family returned to Hong Kong, only to face brutal years under Japanese occupation. Bruce's early childhood unfolded amid bombs, poverty, and overcrowded slums. But within that harsh environment, seeds of creativity and defiance began to grow. Bruce's father was a well-known Cantonese opera actor, and by the age of 6, Bruce was already appearing in films. His screen presence and confidence were evident even then. But the streets of Hong Kong were unforgiving, and Bruce often got into fights. He wasn't just a performer, he was a scrapper, someone who understood violence from both art and survival. His formal martial arts training began under the legendary Ip Man, a master of Wing Chun. But Bruce didn't stop there. He experimented with boxing, fencing, and even street fighting. As a teenager, he won a boxing championship in Hong Kong. Yet despite his physical talents, Bruce was restless. At 18, he left for America, enrolling at the University of Washington to study philosophy. To support himself, he taught martial arts, and what started as a way to pay the bills turned into a revolutionary new system of combat thought. Bruce began to challenge the rigid forms of traditional martial arts. He believed in efficiency over ritual, flexibility over form. This gave birth to Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist, a fighting philosophy that encouraged adaptation. Absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own, he wrote. This wasn't just a combat system, it was a worldview, a star on his own terms. Bruce Lee's American breakthrough came in 1966 with The Green Hornet, where he played Kato, the chauffeur-turned-martial arts enforcer. Although the show only lasted one season, Bruce's performance left a permanent mark. His movements were so fast, the camera crew had to ask him to slow down, something unheard of in television history. But even with his talent, Bruce quickly hit a wall. Hollywood couldn't figure out what to do with a Chinese leading man. He was offered sidekick roles, villainous stereotypes, or characters who spoke broken English, roles that Bruce flat-out rejected. Despite teaching martial arts to celebrities like Steve McQueen, Sharon Tate, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bruce remained stuck in the margins. Frustrated and out of patience, he returned to Hong Kong in 1971, unaware that the Green Hornet had made him a star there. The local audience knew the show not by its actual title, but as The Kato Show. His return was met with open arms, and Bruce quickly signed a deal with Golden Harvest. His first film, The Big Boss, shattered box office records across Asia. Then came Fist of Fury, a cultural anthem of resistance and pride. By the time he wrote, directed, and starred in The Way of the Dragon, which ended with an epic showdown against Chuck Norris in Rome's Colosseum, he had become a global phenomenon. Hollywood took notice, and Enter the Dragon, a co-production with Warner Brothers, was greenlit. It would be the first kung fu film produced by a major American studio, and Bruce had creative control, but he would never see its premiere. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973, just 6 days before the film's release, the day the dragon fell. Bruce Lee's sudden death at the age of 32 stunned the world. He had been at the Hong Kong apartment of Taiwanese actress Betty Ting Pei, reportedly working on a film script when he complained of a headache. He took a common painkiller called Equagesic and went to lie down. He never woke up. Hours later, he was pronounced dead at Queen Elizabeth Hospital. The official cause was cerebral edema, swelling of the brain, but the details only added to the mystery. He had collapsed once before, just months earlier, while dubbing lines for Enter the Dragon. At the time, doctors had also diagnosed brain swelling and treated him with mannitol. Rumors flew. Was he poisoned? Was it an allergic reaction? A reaction to cannabis in his system? Or worse, was it a family curse? Forensic expert Donald Tire, flown in from Scotland Yard, ruled it a death by misadventure. But questions didn't stop. In later decades, new theories emerged. In 2018, biographer Matthew Polly suggested Bruce died from heat stroke. Bruce had reportedly had his sweat glands surgically removed under his arms to avoid appearing sweaty on camera, making it difficult for his body to cool down. Then in 2022, a Spanish medical study proposed something stranger. Bruce may have died from hyponatremia, low sodium levels caused by excessive water intake. This theory argues that Bruce's kidney function had become compromised from overhydration, medications, and poor diet, leading to fatal brain swelling. Despite all the scientific analysis, Bruce's daughter Shannon says the real tragedy is simpler. It's that the world lost a man who had just begun to share his deepest ideas. Not just about fighting, but about being human. Shannon's lifelong mission of truth. When Bruce died, Shannon Lee was just 4. She doesn't remember his voice clearly or the way he looked in everyday life. But she remembers the feeling, his warmth, his energy, his playfulness. Growing up in Los Angeles, she often felt the weight of being Bruce Lee's daughter. Strangers expected her to be just like him, to fight, to act, to embody a legend. But the loss of her brother Brandon in 1993 shattered whatever expectations remained. Brandon was 28 when he died in a freak accident while filming The Crow. A prop gun, meant to be loaded with blanks, discharged a real bullet due to a tragic oversight. It was a haunting parallel to his father's fate. Shannon was devastated, lost in grief, and questioning everything, until she opened a box filled with her father's old journals. Inside were handwritten notes, poems, and personal reflections. One passage stood out. "The medicine for my suffering I had within me from the very beginning." That line stayed with her. It helped her heal. It helped her understand that Bruce Lee wasn't just a screen legend. He was a seeker of truth, someone trying to understand his own pain just as she was now doing. In the years that followed, Shannon trained seriously in Jeet Kune Do, studied acting, and took roles in films like Enter the Eagles and Martial Law. But eventually, she stepped behind the camera. As producer of The Legend of Bruce Lee and the hit series Warrior, based on a concept Bruce had written decades earlier, Shannon found her purpose not in imitating her father, but in amplifying his voice. Today, she leads the Bruce Lee Foundation and continues to write and speak about his philosophy. Her 2020 book, Be Water, My Friend, reveals the spiritual teachings behind his martial arts. For Shannon, preserving Bruce Lee's legacy is not about nostalgia. It's about relevance. She believes the world is only now catching up to the man her father was half a century ago. a legacy, etched in ink, not just muscle. Bruce Lee once wrote, "The key to immortality is first living a life worth remembering. If immortality is measured by impact, he more than earned it." But Shannon Lee insists we remember him not just as the dragon on screen, but as the man behind the philosophy. He believed that power came from within, that courage wasn't about brute force, but about authenticity. He resisted being boxed in, whether by Hollywood or by martial arts traditions, and he fought to be seen as a full human being. Shannon has carried that message into modern conversations about race, gender, and identity. When she speaks about her father, she doesn't just describe his strength. She evokes his softness, his intellect, his commitment to self-actualization. Through her work, Bruce Lee has become more than a cultural icon. He's become a guide for those looking to live intentionally. And that's the awful truth Shannon wants us to know. The world may have misunderstood him. It celebrated his fists but ignored his heart. It honored his body but overlooked his mind. Yet thanks to her efforts, that truth is finally coming into focus, not as myth,